Oh, Canada, you rascals, you broke our little red, white, and blue hearts. You prevailed, played the spoiler of what would have been such an amazing story. There were so many Disney movies to be made that are not going to get greenlighted now because you heartless, mapley jerks north of the border had to go and break our hearts. Corey, this is the part where I would normally do my big long-winded intro, but I just can't. I got to turn the floor over to you, my proud Canadian brother.
Yeah, another championship, right? They just start you win so many, it doesn't even right. It's just like whatever the Canadians with 24 Stanley Cups. Does it really make a difference if you win a 25th? Um, but no, I went into that tournament not really caring, to be honest, and then really got pulled in with the Saturday game with all the fights off the hop there. And then yesterday's, I actually was listening to Spit and Chicklets earlier, and they were talking about how somehow yesterday's game actually lived up, if not outmatched, that Saturday game. So um, and just for it to end in overtime, right? That's the way it needs to end. So obviously happy with another championship, and I think that's four in a row now for Canada between this, the last World Cup, Vancouver, and Sochi. So let's go for five. And where is the Olympics next year? I think it's in Italy. So
Italy,
yeah,
yeah, the
yeah,
Alps, yeah, and I same way, Corey. Like going into the tournament, I kind of didn't care at all, to be honest with you. And then we had the big game; it kind of drew us all in. I was like, hooked. And then last night it was a pretty good game, but I would say there was a moment when I again decided I didn't care about this, and it wasn't a worthwhile tournament at all. It was about half a second after Connor McDavid scored the game winner, I realized that this tournament just doesn't even count, really, if you think about it at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm just gonna wipe that one from the memory. It's not a real thing. It never actually happened. And I'm more of a World Juniors guy anyway. To me, the under 20, that's the one that counts.
and
That's
hey,
the
that's
one
where
that
the U.S. has got two in a row. So
that's right. That's right.
maybe a different result last night had USA chosen Clayton Keller, but it's funny already seeing mock-ups for the Olympics next year, and Clayton Keller's name being added to that, and potentially Dylan Gunther being added to Team Canada. Maybe Logan Cooley for USA as well. I guess we'll see. But yeah,
I was watching it with some other youth hockey coaches and some kids from the hockey teams, and there's a lot of air hockey and street hockey and backyard sauce hockey going on. Big old hockey party last night, and I was the only Utah fan in the room, and I was like, yeah, they should have had Keller. Like, look at this Chris Kreider. What's he bringing to the table? They brought him in to be a bully, and all their first liners are the bullies. I don't know that Kreider and Trocheck are really doing their thing. Trocheck took a penalty, and right as I finished saying that, Kreider just absolutely smashed a Canadian and got the board. I'm like, well, Keller wouldn't do that, But so it's kind of funny in that moment. I really had to eat a piece of humble pie. But I will say, like, Binnington was giving up some rebounds, and I didn't really feel like the U.S. was following up shots very well. There was a couple times when, I saw JT Miller and others kind of curl back a little bit and not follow up shots. And I thought, if the big mean grinders aren't going to be grinding and battling in front of the net, why not just bring more skill? You know what I mean? I don't
Mhm.
know that the depth muscle really accomplished what Bill Guerin hoped that it would when he left off pieces like Clayton Keller. I saw, Matthew Boldy getting involved. I saw Brady Tkachuk getting involved, JT Miller getting involved physically. I didn't really notice like a pace pushing physical presence from the fourth
Mhm.
line of Team USA. And I almost feel like, Clayton Keller probably would have been a better addition. But anyway, that's for me to say in hindsight, being 2020, especially a guy who really pretended not to care about the tournament most of the time that it was going. So,
Yeah. The only
um,
other thing I would say is just over 9 million, I think it was almost 10 million viewers last night on ESPN. So lots of people turning into this game who were otherwise not hockey fans. Maybe some more hockey fans were created. And I mean, we've seen that in the past, probably even more created had USA won last night. But you look at the 1980 Miracle on Ice, you look at the 1996 World Cup, where a lot of the players playing in that tournament became hockey players because of the 1980 Miracle on Ice. So maybe kids in states that are not traditionally hockey states got some more fans last night, got some more players who, a 5-year-old in whatever Louisiana or Alabama or Tennessee wants to be a hockey player now because they saw that game last night.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. As the kind of the resident hockey weirdo in my social network of friends outside of my friends from the rink, of course, where we're all the hockey weirdos in the family. I got so many text messages, this last week from so many different people. Hey, what's going on with this? Does this happen every year? Why are they so mad? Is this politics? Is this hockey? Is it always like this? How do I watch this game? Like what, so many different text messages about it. And then, of course, last night after the heartbreaker, I was getting every text message there is. So I think definitely a lot of football, baseball, and basketball fans were turned on by it. And it was funny. I even saw like this bizarre Twitter exchange where Kevin Durant of the NBA was getting into it with fans and telling them that they should stop complaining about the NBA All-Star game, because if they don't like it, they can just go watch the hockey All-Star game.
Mm-hmm.
They do care.
JJ Watt as well.
Yeah, it was kind of
Yeah.
funny. These fans were like, "Yeah, okay, you got it, KD. That's exactly what I'm going to do." But it was kind of funny. Like they were complaining about, sort of a petulant, childish attitude, and then he was like, "Well, why don't you? You don't even deserve to watch basketball. Go watch hockey instead." Got it.
And now we need to see the Canadian capital, the Ottawa Senators, make the playoffs, because we need to see Brady Tkachuk in playoff hockey. I think he was probably the best player for US in that tournament, maybe outside of Hellebuck, but he got Drew Doughty again last night with a huge hit. I would love that type of player on Utah. That's probably not going to happen unless Ottawa misses the playoffs and by chance he asks out, but we need to see him in playoff hockey. We saw Matthew in Calgary, and we saw Matthew reach a new level when he arrived in Florida. So really starting to see Brady Tkachuk in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
100%. And I said the same thing last night. I said, if you had asked me before this tournament if Brady Tkachuk was going to be Team USA's MVP, I would have said there's not a snowball's chance. And it might have been Hellebuck, who would have been the big money favorite, I think, to be the MVP. But even if Brady's runner-up, I don't think anybody had him on their list of candidates for that. He was tremendous. And I don't know, maybe Ottawa will be relocated to Quebec City, and he'll decide he doesn't want to speak French and he wants to speak Utah instead. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
Fair enough.
And maybe, the Quebec Nordiques will just trade him to us for, I don't know, Andre Tourigny and Maverick Lamoureux, right?
Yeah.
Because Mario Duhamel, that'll be what takes it right over the edge, maybe Thomas Lavoie, friend of the show, Thomas Lavoie.
That's right.
So those last time they were in Quebec City, it was very important to them that they had many local personalities associated with the team. But anyway, Quebec is not in the Four Nations Challenge. Neither are we. We're getting geared back up for the Utah Hockey Club season. Players are back in town. They were all playing golf in Hawaii, getting sunburned, eating who knows what, drinking who knows what, and now it's time to bag skate them, get them back into game shape, get them back on the ice. And I think Utah fans especially may be more energized and excited to get this season rolling again than maybe anybody else, any other fan base in the league, because we finally are about to see the team that we were promised since the summer and haven't seen together because of so many crazy long-term injuries to key pieces. We've got Sean Dursey looking like he's poised to come back. We've got Logan Cooley looking like he's poised to come back. We've got our major pieces who've been out for the majority of the season, or even just more recently, all looking like finally we're going to see them out on the ice together again, which is going to be so critical for us. We're going to need them badly, because we have an uphill climb to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's going to be a very difficult challenge. So I saw a quote from Mikhail Sergachev, who is such a great interview. Wink, wink, Utah Hockey Club PR. We love Mikhail Sergachev interviews, just saying, in case anybody's listening. But he's such a great interview. And he kind of broke it down in a way that I hadn't really thought of, because I had my spreadsheet out. I'm running every number, looking at historics. What do we need to do? Percentage this, percentage that. And I will bore the listeners with that here shortly. Don't worry. I have some minutia to dive into with you. But Mikhail Sergachev doesn't look at it that way. He said, we just need to win 3 games. Vancouver needs to lose 3. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he said. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. And I guess that's why he's a good leader in the room, is that perspective and experience. So what did you make of the Sergachev quotes, Corey?
I mean, it's a lot easier than doing all the math, right? And that's it. That's it. We have 26 games to make up 6 points, and coming right into it too with a back-to-back. It's LA tomorrow, and I think it's Vancouver on Sunday. 2 games against Vancouver in those remaining 26. 1 game against Calgary. We're behind both of those teams. Probably need to get all 6 points in those games, and probably need to win all 3 of them in regulation. So the 4-point game, as they call them. 5 or 6 games to go before the deadline. Need to show Bill Armstrong that there's a reason to add to this team. It's going to be a lot harder to make the playoffs if we're moving out pieces. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is there's almost like there's the race to the postseason, which is an uphill climb, and a lot does go into it. But there's also that like first deadline, which is the trade deadline, where if the players even want to have a chance to go for it, they're going to have to really get their act together quickly. So hopefully they didn't get too sunburned out on the beach and the golf course during this break, and they're dialed in and ready to go, because it's going to be an uphill climb. I took a little bit of a look at recent history, what it's taken to qualify for the second wild card slot over the last 3 seasons. In the East, the last 3 years, the second wildcard team had 100 points, 92 points, and 91 points, respectively. In the West, it was 97, 95, and 98. When you average those together, you get 95 and a half. So you would think that 96 is a pretty good bet to get you in, but not always. Vancouver, who currently occupies that spot, is on pace for 94 points, whereas Utah is on pace for 83 and a half. Now, this second wild card slot, it seems in the West especially, seems to kind of be the spot that nobody wants. These teams can't seem to get hot. They can't seem to take advantage of opportunities when they come. Everyone's just kind of sticking in the mushy middle. I even looked at the goal differential of the 3 teams in contention for that slot, and goal differential is usually a pretty good indicator of whether or not you're a true postseason threat. Playoff teams tend to be in the positive there, or at least fairly close to 0. Meanwhile, Vancouver's -11 right now. Calgary's -17 and Utah's -12. So this is kind of like the race to back into the second wildcard spot that nobody seems to want. So a good opportunity for us to reach out and grab it. But keep in mind, for us to get the 54 points we would need to end up with enough points to qualify. No, I'm sorry. There's 54 possible points remaining in the 26 games left, and we need 39 to get to that level of competitiveness where we would be right in the mix of things. And in order to get 39 points, that means we'd have to get 72.2 of remaining points available, which over 82 games, that means it's a 118-point pace. So for the final 26 games, we need to play as though we're a 118-point team if we want to get in. It's going to be difficult, even with everybody healthy, even if they're not that rusty, and even if we make some wise, astute decisions at the deadline. But to Mikhail Sergachev's point, we can't overthink it. We can't overthink it. It's really just winning those 3 critical games and making sure Vancouver loses them, right?
Yeah, and you look at, especially, actually, I think of those numbers you just read, the most surprising to me is that Calgary is -17, considering the play of Dustin Wolf this season. So that's a little surprising. But Vancouver extending Kevin Lankinen today, and possibly a reaction to the news earlier in the week that Thatcher Demko is out once again, week to week. That's probably going to put him after the deadline. So, I mean, Kevin Lankinen's gotten them this far, and he's played very well this season. But, I mean, still, Thatcher Demko is their guy in net. Still going to have a little bit of the drama surrounding Elias Pettersson. He did not have a good Four Nations face-off with Sweden. Played under 10 minutes in that last game. We've seen photos that maybe there's a possible knee injury or a knee concern. And the reality with him still is July 1st is the date where Vancouver has to decide if he's going to be a piece layer long term or if they got to move him, because that's when the no move clause kicks in. And if he does not have a good stretch run here, he's probably getting moved out. And if he doesn't have a good stretch run, Vancouver's probably not making the playoffs either. So I wonder almost if this is going to be a 2-horse race between Utah and Calgary.
Yes, Vancouver's got so much going on, whereas Calgary and Utah are just a little bit more hopeful feeling, right? They're playing for each other. There's good vibes. They're meeting or exceeding expectations that they had going into the season. It seems like brighter days are ahead for both clubs. And meanwhile, Vancouver's in like a drama swirl of darkness and depression, and Elias Peterson going to the Four Nations and looking like he's 40 years old. I don't know what's going on in Vancouver, but it ain't good. And if there's a team to be chasing, I feel like that's a good one to be nipping at the heels of. And to your point, Calgary may be just as formidable despite being behind them in the standings when it comes to qualifying for the playoffs. Now, with that, the deadline does loom, as you said, and the team's healthy, so they may be able to show enough to convince Bill Armstrong to do a little something at the deadline.
Yep.
Now,
2 weeks from today as well.
Yes. Now, Bill is been making some media tours recently. He's been making the rounds. He did him and Andre Tourney did a Q&A with Craig Morgan for NHL.com. I saw Cole Bagley released a Q&A with Bill Armstrong today for KSL, and Bill was on the Utah Puck Report with Jay Stevens, which is an amazing podcast that if you're not listening to, you need to get out there and listen to it, I would say, along with SLC Puck and, of course, Clean Hits. Jay Stevens' Utah Puck Report is amazing. His passion for the game, background in the game, and his ability to get a lot out of those interviews is truly great to hear. So if you've not listened to General Manager Bill Armstrong on Jay Stevens' podcast, definitely go and do that. Not now, after you've completed this podcast and liked it and commented and subscribed, then go listen to Jay Stevens' podcast with Bill Armstrong. But I found that Bill's answers to the questions were pretty interesting, Corey. Of course, everybody was asking, what's the plan for the deadline? And Bill Armstrong is full of surprises, but he's not exactly the most mums the word GM out there. He'll talk and give good answers, and he'll give little Easter eggs sometimes too. Even though sometimes he can surprise us with like a Sergachev trade. But he's been pretty straightforward about it. I'm looking to improve the team every day. If a move comes that helps us both now and in the future over the long term, I'm going to do it. But I'm going to be smart with my money. I'm going to be smart with my cap space. I'm going to be smart with my assets and the decisions I make. I'm not going to just go crazy and start buying like it's going out of style just because we're within sniffing distance of the second wild card spot. Is that what you took from those interviews, Corey? How did you interpret it?
I think we're going to do some buying and some selling at this deadline. Really, no matter how we do in this next couple of games here. I think a player like Ian Cole, we could still, do you hang on to Ian Cole and still try and make a playoff run, or do you just redeem him and get the second round pick, third round pick? I think we could buy. I don't think we're going to rent players, but if there's players who are kind of in that Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz, Mikhail Sergachev age range, I think it makes sense to bring them in. I don't think we're going to do any big blockbuster moves. I think to use a Bill Armstrong phrase, I think maybe we could plant the seeds for a bigger deal at the draft. But yeah, my impression is that we're going to do a little buying and some selling.
Yeah, and I think it'll be minor. And I think the draft is probably a better place to think because Bill said things like, hey, keep in mind, we did a lot of our buying over
Hmm.
the offseason when we got Marino and Sergachev and when we signed Stenlin and Cole and when we picked up DeSimone and Mata during the season. So he's kind of reminding people, hey, I was really busy. So I'm
And he
not
hasn't
sitting
seen the
here.
team yet either, right? There's
Exactly.
56 games in, and we have not seen the team that he's envisioned. And I mean, it could still be a couple more games if Logan Cooley is out, if Connor Ingram is out. Like we might be into the 60s here by the time we see the full roster that he assembled in July.
Exactly. And I think that to your point, there may be some seed planting, there may be some tinkering. There probably won't be the big Sergachev style blockbuster
Mhm.
at the deadline. But what happens at the deadline may set the stage for that later. Um, and one other thing to think about is that it takes two to tango, right? So those
Mhm.
hockey deals are hard to come by. Usually, it's going to be roster players for futures this time of year. We've seen in the big trades lately, teams do roster players for roster players, right? Like Vancouver somehow turned JT Miller into Philip Heatle and Marcus Pedersen. Whatever you think about that trade, it ended up being roster players for roster players, and then of
Mhm.
course Carolina ended up with Rantanen for Natchez, and that's looked interesting to say the least, especially now with rumors that Rantanen's back on the market. I thought it was interesting that Bill Armstrong was asked about those rumors of Utah having all this money and looking to spend it on players like Rantanen and Marner, and
Mhm.
he seemed to pretty well shoot those down in a very polished Bill Armstrong way. He said, "We're going to want that money available when we're ready to contend and not be tied up in players that are maybe a little past their prime." So
Mhm.
I'm not expecting giant free agent splashes. I think it's going to come via trades. And there's a few different trade options. And we asked Twitter, we asked our Discord, our Club Mammoth section of our Discord, where our subscribers hang out and chat and interact and help inform some of the show ideas for their best proposals. We thought we would do a little bit of a who says no segment here, where our fans put on their GM hats and put together their best trade proposals between Utah Hockey Club and some other NHL team, a hypothetical trade. And we're here to evaluate those and give our opinion on who we think would say no and what might have to happen to the deal to get it to go through. So the first one here is from Flo on our Discord. Hello, Flo. We love Flo, major contributor to our Discord, and one of the Utah Hockey Club fans who has to have put in the most miles to support the team, having traveled here all the way from Australia and stayed in the States for quite some time, taking in multiple Utah Hockey Club games as well as games at other NHL arenas around the country. So Flo knows her stuff, and she came up with what I thought was a very thought-provoking proposal, Corey. She suggested that Buffalo, who continues to be a mess and continues to look for ways to make changes to somehow dig themselves out of things, may want to make a big splash at some point and potentially make Dylan Cousins available, who's been rumored,
Mhm.
as well as uh, look to bolster the right side of defense. This is a team that has a ton of high quality left shot defensemen, and they're much,
Mhm.
much, much thinner on the right. So I think that's where Flo got the idea of suggesting that perhaps they might ask for Michael Kesselring in return, as well as Lawson Krause, who showed up in Frank Saravalli's trade board today. We'll touch on that in a moment. But Krause, a guy who we all know and love from his Arizona days, has been struggling this season, but has some term on his contract. GM Kevin Adams of the Buffalo Sabres has talked about having a hard time attracting quality players to Buffalo. Lawson Krause is from the area up in Ontario and has a little bit of term on his deal. So it's not somebody they'd have to lure in. They've had some issues with heart and soul and grit on that team. Tage Thompson taking a big hit. nobody really answering the bell. So I think, when Flo suggested perhaps Buffalo would be interested in Kraus and Kesselring for Dylan Cousins and another piece, maybe Komarov, the big Russian D who's playing for their minor league team, who had a lot of success in the QMJHL as a youngster, playing for Maverick Lamoureux's Drummondville team that went to the Memorial Cup last season and was a valiant injury fill-in for Maverick Lamoureux for most of the season, and had a lot of battle testing with the Quebec Remparts in the QMJHL previous to that. So a lot of talking there. But what do you think, Corey, about Flo's proposal to Buffalo of Kraus and Kesselring for Cousins and Komarov? Who says no?
I kind of feel like Buffalo says no because I subscribe to there's a quote from Sam Pollock, who was the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens teams, those dynasty teams way back when. And his thinking was whoever gets the best player in the deal wins the trade. And in my mind, of these four players, the best player is Dylan Cousins. And for us, I think that checks a lot of the boxes. We've talked a lot about needing a second line center, especially one with size. He's a center. He has the size. He's a right-hand shot to offset Cooley, who's a left-hand shot. He's got a pretty good contract, especially with the cap going up to 115. He's got term. He's got some pretty good seasons under his belt. He struggled a little bit this year, but it's so hard to evaluate players in Buffalo, right? And they're almost a little bit gun shy where they trade out Eichel, he reaches new levels. They trade out Sam Reinhart, he reaches new levels. He gets, 50-something goals last year. He gets the goal to win the Stanley Cup.
Ryan O'Reilly.
Yes, playoff MVP.
So when you say that the team that gets the best player in the deal usually wins the deal, I think nobody told Buffalo that. So history would suggest that is not a lesson they have learned. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the other thing too with Buffalo is I don't even really know where to start there. I mean, you can't really factor in. So this is going to be 14 years of no playoffs, which NHL record, already an NHL record. But I mean, the current GM can't really be responsible for the stuff that happened before him. But at the same time, I mean, you got to start winning some games here. So, maybe you do have to start moving some of that collection of young players. Buffalo does still have draft picks. They do still have prospects coming up. And like you said, Kesselring really addresses a need there on that right side. They can put him with Darlene. They can put him with Owen Power. He showed this year that he can play a top four role. In my mind, he would be the hardest piece to lose in this deal between Kesselring and Kraus. But at the same time, I also wonder if not necessarily selling high on Kesselring, but he's had a great season. There could be an opportunity to cash in on that. And when you look at as much as he succeeded in a top four role this year outside of injuries, that's not really going to be something offered going ahead because Sean Dursey's back, John Marino's back, Maverick Lamoureux is right there. We have a first-round draft pick where there could be another right-handed defenseman getting selected in that spot. And that's not to say about, left side defenseman moving over. Even if, Sean Dursey moves to the left side, that right side's still pretty crowded. You could see, Simashev could move over. So yeah, maybe there is an opportunity there with Kesselring. Lawson Kraus, like we said, he has not had a great season. He's had some scratches, or I guess the one scratch so far from Andre Tourigny, same with Matthias Michelli's had a couple of scratches. And I wonder, he's been with his organization as long as Keller, as long as Nick Schmaltz, maybe there's just a change of scenery to give him that true reset.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I could see Buffalo saying no. I could see them being gun shy, maybe learning the lesson this time. But having chatted with some Buffalo fans about this and doing a bit of an informal poll, I got really positive feedback about it because I think as difficult of a task as it is to find a center of a certain age that could potentially be a number two guy, bona fide, it's equally as difficult to find a right shot defenseman who has the ability to play in the top four and play with talent like Darlene and Power. Those guys are really hard to come by too. So as much as us Utah fans are scouring every roster in the league looking for a potential center fit, they're doing the same with the right D fit. And I think that Kesselring is a guy that they've identified. Now, Kesselring's a friend of the show, and I don't want to trade him. especially not to
Mhm.
Buffalo, right? I wouldn't
Cruel
do it
and
to the guy.
unusual treat.
That's our Kessel King. We're not doing that to him. These are hypothetical, A and B. I want to bring up a point here that Craig Morgan touched on in his interview with Andre Tourigny and Bill Armstrong. Uh, Both Armstrong and Tierney mentioned that the production from players like Krause and Michelli comes from the fact that there are younger players stepping up to play bigger minutes and bigger roles, and therefore their usage is going to go down. So, as an example, Bill Armstrong says that we haven't had as much secondary scoring as we've had in the past, and that's because our young guys have taken more ice time. And Andre Tourigny said that Michelli and Krause are in a different situation than last year. Their minutes are way down. They're playing 20, 25% less in different situations, and their production is going to go down as a result. And that this is a symptom of adding depth and youth to the team, that the effectiveness of these players and production of these players is going to go down. So that begs the question then, does their trade value continue to go down from here? Is it just a logical thing to look for a move, a change of scenery where they might get more opportunity? Probably also makes sense for those players. I'm sure they love living in Utah. I'm sure they love their teammates, but they have to think about their career first. So
Mhm.
if they're playing in a situation here where their general manager and their coach are both admitting it's not that favorable for them, I don't know that it's us sewering these guys or wishing them the worst to explore the idea of whether or not maybe this would be the appropriate time to make a move on anybody. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
clarify that for the listeners here, because we're going to see a lot of the same names kind of come up as we evaluate these trade proposals from Clean Hits listeners. And I think it's because when we look at our roster, we see depth on the wings. We see some underutilized assets like Krause and Michelli, and we see a hole in the center ice. So it's really just basic math to try to figure out how to do that, especially when we have Dursey and Marino coming back and Maverick Lamoureux right on the cusp. I think that's where people look at Michael Kesselring, who, again, I stress, don't trade him. But he's coming up in these hypothetical trade scenarios like this one from Club Mammoth on Discord. Krause and Kesselring to Florida for Anton Lundell. Who says no?
I think Florida says no. I would add to that deal, and even if we add,
Yeah.
I still think Florida says no. Um, I don't want to say he's like a successor to Barkov because Barkov's not that old, but there's really no reason to trade Lundell. I think this deal probably makes Florida worse in their try for 2 straight cups here.
I would agree. They do have a hole at right D, and they are going to have a problem signing Sam Bennett. So this saves them a lot, saves them some cap space if we look to maybe do some salary retention on Krause.
Mhm.
Florida has gone all in multiple times in a row, and it's served them well. They're the defending, reigning Stanley Cup champions in the NHL, but they have almost no futures assets. So I wonder if we were to add some of our plethora of second round picks that we have, maybe chuck in a couple of seconds and retain some salary on Krause, does that move the needle enough for Florida to consider it? What do you think?
I still think Lundell's part of their future, right? It's similar
Me
to
too.
the Spencer Knight commentary. He's a trade chip right now, but he's also their starting goalie in a year from now when Sergei Bobrovsky is retired. So I don't know. It feels like I don't even know what a good analogy would be. Like selling your steering wheel to get some cash to fix the brakes or something like
Yeah,
that, right? So
exactly. That's right. Yep,
uh,
exactly.
yeah,
Uh, Robbing Peter to pay Paul, right?
yeah,
Probably not a great fit, but it's hard for that team to tinker right now. They lack the flexibility financially, and they lack the flexibility from a liquid asset futures perspective. But maybe that's okay. Maybe they can just keep things exactly the same and win another cup and figure it out later.
hmm
Now, one team that's not going to win the cup this year and has some pieces that they're going to have to make some hard decisions on who is a part of the future and what the future actually looks like is Boston, the Boston Bruins. So this is kind of a response to a previous podcast. I think in the comments, somebody had mentioned, or I had mentioned on the podcast that I might be willing to trade Matthias Michelli for Trent Frederick despite the fact that Michelli's career production is much higher and Frederick's a pending UFA.
Mhm.
I got a little bit of flack on that, probably deservedly so, online. And I wanted to get your feedback on that. Who says no? Michelli for Frederick?
I would, if I was Utah, I would say no to this, just with the caveat that if I'm trading Michelli, a young player, Frederick is going to be an unrestricted free agent. So, as much as Michelli has struggled this year, that he's been scratched a couple of times, he still had 57 points last year. And if you trade him and you bring in Trent Frederick for, 25 games, and then Frederick signs elsewhere in the summer, not a great look, especially if Michelli goes to Boston. He's going to have more opportunity there than he can here offensively. Like if you put him with David Pasternak, who's already scored 60 goals in the past, and Michelli becomes a 70-point player, and we have nothing to show for it. But if we can get Frederick extended, big fan of that deal, because Trent Frederick, I think, is exactly the type of player we need in our bottom six. I want a third line of Trent Frederick, Jack McBain, and Kevin Stenlund, and go out there for 10 minutes and it's just meaningful hockey where they cause havoc. I don't know a nicer way to say it, but they're just a pain in the ass for 10 minutes. You look back to Bill Armstrong's teams in St. Louis and players like Oscar Sundquist in the bottom six, and they were a pain to play against. And I think we could replicate that.
Barbashev,
That's
yeah.
Barbashev, yes. Bring in a player like Trent Frederick, and I think that makes the bottom six a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it would be a bit rich to give up Michelli there. I'm not sure how Michelli fits into the future with Tija Ginla and Daniel Boot
Mhm.
knocking on the door and Michelli already finding himself a healthy scratch. I don't believe that's a position he wants to be in his career. I'm sure he wants to stay in Utah and play with Juuso Välimäki, his buddy, and Barrett Hayton, his good buddy. He came up through this system. He's a homegrown talent. He's well liked. Fans love him. He's electric when he's on his game, but he's starting to look like maybe the kind of player who needs more opportunity to show that than he's getting here. And I think those opportunities are only going to get harder to come by. So, as much as I don't want to trade him, and as much as that risk is real of him going somewhere else and just exploding, it does also seem like probably somebody who would be on the evaluation list of whether or not a deal involving them can improve the club versus somebody who's on the untouchable list like Gunther and Cooley and Keller who aren't going anywhere. I think it's reasonable to expect that Michelli and Krause are on the list of guys to be evaluated. I totally agree that Trent Frederick would be a huge add. I might, as a gambling man and as a big softy who wants to see Michelli have some success, which I know is probably not the perspective that the actual general manager is taking, it feels like a nice fit to give Michelli a shot in Boston, and Frederick just seems like the perfect missing ingredient from that bottom six, and I might go all in that way, but that
And don't
probably
forget
also.
too that our assistant general manager John Ferguson came from Boston, so he's very familiar with Trent Frederick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ah, well, that one is a little bit of a strange one because it would definitely happen at the deadline. If it were to
Mm-hmm.
happen, it's not more of a draft day move because of Frederick's pending UFA status. We talked about a lot of assets we have. Maybe if we do something where we move out Ian Cole for a second round pick or something like that, because that's a UFA we're probably not going to resign. Maybe we turn around and reassure the team that we're not giving up on them by giving up a second or two for
Mm-hmm.
Trent Frederick and trying to resign him that away, right? Where we're not throwing in the towel. We are believing in the team and we're trying to add to the core, but we're not thinking just about this season. We're thinking about seasons to come as well. So that might be a good example of one of those buy/sell scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one is interesting because it's for a much younger player than some of the ones that we've talked about. This also came from the Club Mammoth section, and this one is a little bit less defined, but it's right in line with the kinds of things that we've been talking about here, which is Krause or Michelli, whichever Columbus prefers, I guess, going to Ohio along with Kesselring or Lamoureux. Once again, not quite sure what Columbus's preference would be with a Cole Sillinger heading to Utah with maybe some picks and prospects to even things out. So this one's not fully fleshed out, but just as a concept, one of our struggling secondary scoring wingers, one of our bright, shiny right defensemen to Columbus for a highly drafted, promising, but not exactly breaking out potential number 2-3 center in Cole Sillinger. So what do you think about that one, Corey? Who says no?
See, I would say no as Utah because I would rather pay a higher price and bring in somebody who's maybe Cylinder could address the second line center issue, but if we give up these pieces and he doesn't, then we're gonna have to pay even more down the road to try again to fix this problem. So I would rather trade even more pieces and bring in again somebody in that Keller, Sergachev, Nick Schmaltz age range that can really help fill that spot in the roster. I think the biggest piece of this that's interesting to me is I have no idea which I value more between Michael Kessering and Maverick Lamoureux. That is an impossible
Yeah.
debate to me. They both have such great qualities. They're both right shot. They're both huge. They both have some pretty decent offense. Great personalities too. Kessering on our show, and we've seen how bubbly Maverick Lamoureux could be as well. And he's even bigger than Kessering. So parting with either one of those two would be more difficult to me than Kraus or Michelli.
Yeah, you'd want to have a little bit more of a sure thing coming back than Cole Sillinger, I think, if you're going to pay the price of somebody like Kesselring or Lamoureux, which, yeah, to your point, is a very dear price to pay. These highly mobile, large right shot defensemen who aren't overly expensive and can provide a lot at both ends of the ice is not a common commodity regularly available in this league. Teams hang on to these guys for a reason. So that brings me to my final proposal here that we got from a Clean Hits listener. Now, this one comes from Kevin Weber on X, who happens to be my first cousin. Also, so he, there's a picture of us floating around somewhere where I'm in, like, I don't know, 4th grade or something, and he's a little baby, and we're taking a picture with Keith Kachuk of all people. Yeah, I got to find that thing and post it. Both of us arms around the Kachukster. So anyway, he's a lifelong hockey fan, just like me, diehard Yotes fan, trying to make the switch to Utah. And he also recognized that Utah needs a solution to their number 2 center situation. And he identified more of a concept than an actual proposal. He looked at the Ottawa Senators, who we were talking about with Brady Tkachuk earlier, and noticed that they've got a lot of depth down the middle there. Stützle, Norris, the often injured Norris, Shane Pinto, Ridley Gregg, quite a haul, quite an embarrassment of riches when it comes to young, effective, potential centermen, potential top 6 centermen in Ottawa. So he talked about potentially adding some futures to Nick Schmaltz and sending him to Ottawa for Josh Norris. So Schmaltz was not a name we'd heard before. And Norris is a name that has a few red flags, given the injury history. I think this is a trade that could involve a lot of different names on both sides as a concept. But I'm wondering, who do you think would say no between Ottawa and Utah if the deal were Schmaltz and picks and prospects for Josh Norris?
Well, first, I think Nick Schmaltz would say no to it. He has a no trade clause, and I don't think he's going to waive it to go to Ottawa. But Josh Norris, I know that's a player we talked about earlier in this year as a potential trade target, and he is an interesting player. And there's some concerns with the contract, but like you said, off injured. So just looking at his IR card here, earlier this year, missed 2 games, upper body injury. Go back to last season, missed the final 25 games of the season after shoulder surgery. Earlier in that season, missed 3 games with a shoulder injury. missed 4 games with a shoulder injury. Go back to the season before that, missed the final 36 games of the season because of shoulder surgery. I don't know if this is the same shoulder or it's both, and I don't know which of that is worse. If you have one shoulder that's just awful, or if you have both that are bad. That same season, you go back, or sorry, the season prior to that, 2021-22, missed 15 games with a shoulder injury. There was another season in here too where there was 2 separate shoulder injuries. Yes. It looks like it was 2022-23 shoulder injury, missed 38 games, came back, was only back for like a week, and then missed 36 games with a shoulder injury. So that just seems like, one more shoulder injury and he's toast, right? So
Yeah, and we've seen it
that's
before. We've seen some bright careers cut short with bad shoulders. I think of the late great Merrick Svatos, rest in peace, whose bum shoulder cost him a bright career that he had started with the Colorado Avalanche with big goal scoring numbers, and he fizzled out quick. I think Peter Pruka is another shoulder injury guy, similar career arc to Merrick Svatos, Coyote legend Peter Pruka. And some others as well, that struggled with shoulder issues. I got my own from my beer league play, just to let you know. I mean, I may have torn a labrum or two in there, so I can relate. But Josh Norris is, man, what a player! Works his butt off, scores a ton of goals. He's just what you want in a two-way center, except for the fact that you can't count on him to be in the
Yeah,
lineup.
that's
So
that's just the thing, right? Outside of the injuries, he checks all the boxes. He's a center. He's big. He's the same age range we're looking for. The contract's not too bad, especially with the rising cap. But it's just those shoulders, right? And I mean, for hockey injuries, that's right up there with, bad knees, groin injury, shoulders. Anything else you can kind of deal with, but that's a tough
yeah,
one.
and Ottawa is a team that, again, they could probably use a right shot defenseman.
Hmm.
So there's probably a better fit there. I'm not trading Kesselring or Lamoureux for Josh Norris. No chance. Not with all those red flags. But if you look at some of those other pieces, a Shane Pinto or Ridley Gregg, man, then you start to really pause a little bit. I'm sure Lawson Krause, who doesn't have the Nick Schmaltz trade protection, wouldn't be the most depressed guy in the world to get sent back to Ontario, where he's from.
Hmm.
And that could be, a fit for Ottawa, who's had a hard time hanging on to players occasionally as well. And they've got a position of depth to deal from. If Norris is not getting them the kinds of returns from the market that they might like for all the reasons that you mentioned, perhaps they do look to move a guy like Pinto or a guy like Greg, to help bolster other areas of need on the roster. So that might be something to keep an eye on as well. I do remember many, many, many rumors about Bill Armstrong being hot after Shane Pinto during the Jacob Chychrun to Ottawa Senators negotiations. We ended up instead with Daniel Boot and a couple of second-round picks, which is looking like a great deal for us in retrospect. And honestly, Ottawa kind of made the best of it too. And Washington's, that deal's kind of worked out for everybody in many ways,
Hmm.
in some respects, but including Chychrun himself. But having said all of that, I would love to add Shane Pinto or Ridley Gregg to the team, even though they're maybe a little bit younger than that Clayton Keller age range we were talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, big fan of both. Ridley Gregg just seems like a improvement on Trent Frederick, right? Where he's got skill and he's kind of annoying to play against too. Um, but my sense would be that they're not available.
Yeah, yeah. Because so much depth, man. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like if you've got Stutzla, if you're playing him, I guess you don't have to play him at center. And I guess with Norris being out a lot, it pays to have both Greg and Pinto. And I guess what they lack is the urgency to sort that situation out, right? Because we're still talking about potential more than anything with Pinto and Greg. And
Hmm.
until such time as they realize it, and until such time as they do have an actual log jam, they probably don't need to make a deal because they have a potential logjam on their hands, not an actual logjam. So the
Exactly.
pickings continue to be slim out on the market, trying to address the 2C issue, which we'll continue to talk about until Bill Armstrong waves his magic wand and solves the problem for us, more likely around draft day than around the deadline coming up here in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks to the deadline, 6 games to go before the deadline. A game, I believe we have a game on deadline day too, which is always kind of a weird one because you see trades and players getting pulled off ice in practice and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
again, 6 days to go and really some must-win games coming up. I mean, we mentioned the Vancouver one on Sunday, but there's also Chicago, worst team in the league. That's got to be 2 points. Like there's no messing around. You got to win that game, and then you go from there.
Yeah. One thing is for sure this season, I do not believe we will see Bill Armstrong go back to the term that he himself coined and hold players out for trade related reasons, which became infamous and standard during the messy and prolonged Jacob Chikrin trade negotiations. But we've got a wild card spot to chase. So we're not going to be holding anybody out of the lineup for trade related reasons before the deadline itself, if at all. So we'll keep our eyes on the news and our ear to the ground and see what we learn in the next 2 weeks as we approach the deadline to see what big moves might be headed our way. In the meantime, so thrilled to have the Utah Hockey Club back in action. So thrilled to have the Utah Hockey Club back healthy. Really excited to watch the next couple of weeks ahead of the deadline and the playoff chase. Beyond, that's not the only exciting thing happening in Clean Hits land. We have a big announcement to be made soon about a little bit of a partnership that we can't wait to share the of with our listeners. So keep an eye out on our social media and in our Discord for more details to follow on that and many other exciting things around Clean Hits and the Utah Hockey Club. Corey, anything to add?
Let's just hope Utah is a lot like Team Canada and does a lot of winning down the stretch here.
I got no retort. I got no comeback. Just play the damn music, Corey. Play the music.